Hi guys, here we are again with our third episode on the merits of psychoanalysis, and this brings us halfway on this project. Today we explore some more characteristics of the unconscious, like its indestructibility and the implications of this statement, and then we move to a critique of the ideology of liberation, erroneously interpreted as the aim of psychoanalysis and instead in opposition to what psychoanalysis intends as the goal of therapy. So the unconscious is not interpretable with the parameters of reality, and this is an idea that many authors will expand on later on, describing a logic of the unconscious to define some rules to describe it. One of the main characteristics that stand out is its atemporality. It's inconsistent with the linear idea of time. The unconscious was always there and does not suffer the effect of time, meaning that it doesn't change with time, it stays connected to our first experiences of satisfaction. And a further implication of this is that it's also immutable, indomitable, and therefore unbreakable. Its indomitability does not imply the wildness that we were denying in our first lecture, but merely its inevitability. It's an aspect of us that reasoning can make more sense of, but that ultimately cannot be changed, just accepted, explored, and used. So knowing this, we can also construct a new idea of sense of guilt, an emotion so human and common. In this perspective, it is not the transgression of rules that leads to guilt or the nonconformity, but the extreme conformity, that is the decision to give up on one's desire. A life devoted to pleasing others, accumulating successes or goods, and conforming to the expectations of our surrounding, that is the real tragedy. So by this, do we mean that the solution is to just fulfill our instincts and refuse to conform? Of course not, and we should know this by now. None of these extremes are recommended by psychoanalysis, but here we are merely stressing how the denial of desire is tremendously harmful for us. Anguish, Recalcati says, is the emotion of desire, because once we leave the safety net of being the servant of the other, that has the undeniable advantage of justifying our existence, making it meaningful and necessarily, well, once we do that, we experience separation and difference. The alienation of the one who recognizes his desire and moves in its direction. Encountering the real is, in a psychodynamics perspective, not only good, but necessary. It's what leads to progress, connection, creation. Here we should stop for a second to explain what the real, in Lacan's words, is. He makes a distinction between reality and the real. Reality is what we live in, relatively stable, made of symbols, rules, relationships. It's pretty straightforward. It's both a frame and a screen. It incorporates all components of our reality and filtrates them. When this screen fades, in relation to intense experiences like trauma, love, illness, then appears the real. That introduces a point of disconnection that wakes us up from the relative calm and predictability of reality. And nightmares are a great example of encountering the real. So to go back to our initial point, the encounter with the real means an inevitable alienation. Reality suits us, the real shakes us. It means leaving the pre-existing order to reach another kind of order that is not based on tranquility and identification. Here I quote Recalcati literally. Every time there is an invention, creation, art, poetry, there inevitably is infraction, subversion, alteration, subjective deviation from the universal symbolic frame of reference. So more about the desire. While the instinct is biologically programmed and aimed at its satisfaction, it seems that desire is instead a kind of perversion of the instinct that aims at a constant nourishment without actual satisfaction. This satisfaction, we will see in the next slide, is impossible. This is because our dependence on language never allows a full enjoyment. And the real creative act is in the lack, in the absence. Here there is a disconnection between sex and reproductive aims. Freud was often defined as obsessed with the sexual component of our psyche. I won't go into that, but it's important to understand that what he really did is making this distinction and understanding that humans have an autoerotic component that drives their desire in a bigger sense and makes them unique. Our sixth argument is tightly connected to the fifth. This insatiable desire, never fully satisfiable, is allowed by a no, the one of educators, parents, society. We remember in our first lecture how the strict duality is not analytical. Here we see that the complete lack of limits isn't either. Having no boundaries between concepts such as reality and imagination is typical of some psychotic disorders where lines are blurred. Lines instead the ones drawn by a no, allow a yes. This is because our first object of satisfaction was lost, and loss is irreversible. The almost always allows perfect expression of the desire because it repeats that missed act over and over. The law does not prevent the free expression of the unconscious. It is the existence of a law that determines the desire. And yet another interesting point to stop, to think, and to come up with more questions and comments if you have any. Please let me know, and I'll see you next time.